you all to our webinar, Case Studies on Carbon Footprinting. We do have a lot of people signed up for this webinar, but I am going to go ahead and respect everybody's time frames and start the webinar on time. Right now, you should all be seeing my screen. It's a three-part webinar series for P2 and sustainability providers. And today's webinar is the third part in this series, which focuses on case studies of carbon footprinting. So my name is Rachel Smith, and I'm with the Northeast Waste Management Officials Association. And I'm here with my colleague Andy Bray and Michelle Gaither, who's with the Northwest Pollution Prevention Resource Center. And she helped me to organize and promote this webinar, so we are co-sponsoring this event. We have three great presenters for you today. They're each going to present a case study of some of the work that they've done doing carbon footprinting. After today's session, their presentations will be posted on this website. So if you come here, each of the presentations will be posted as a PowerPoint. And we will also post a recording of this session, probably by tomorrow. So with that, I just want to go over some ground rules. We are going to save questions to the end of each presentation, and then we'll have some more time for questions and discussions at the very end of the webinar. If you do have questions, please feel free to use the question box, and you can enter them, while it's fresh on your mind. But note that we probably won't get to them until after the speaker has done presenting. Also, you can use the raise your hand feature through GoToMeeting. So when we open it up for discussion, if you just want to, there's a little icon to raise your hand, and we can call on you, and you can ask a question that way. Okay, so our first presenter here is Paul Comey, and he's with the Green Mountain Coffee Roasters in Vermont. He has made initial efforts to map the company's environmental footprint and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. He's been with Green Mountain Coffee for about 17 years. Before that, he was with Baseline Solutions, which was a consulting company, and that focused on improvements for manufacturing, pollution prevention, equipment design, and process layout. So he's going to present first. I'll introduce all our presenters now. But our second presenter is Carissa Regano with Pure Strategies Incorporated in Massachusetts. And she is going to present a case study on Oakhurst Dairy. She's done some carbon footprinting and greenhouse gas reporting for that organization, as well as for universities, businesses, and international corporations. And previously, she has worked with green chemistry for the Natural Resource Defense Council and compliance consulting for Chem2Hill Incorporated. Our third and final speaker for today is Angela Cora, and she's with the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory in Washington State. And she has worked on sustainable design, energy efficiency, and carbon management. She's been with the PNNL since 2008, and she has been doing work for assessing performance of green buildings, energy and water conservation, carbon inventories, and carbon management policies and projects. So I am going to go on with the show. Looks like we have about half of our registered participants that are signed on. I wanted to start with a poll, and this poll is just to get your idea of, just to try to figure out what you already know. so there's no right or wrong answer. If you could enter your best guess, that would be great. Let's give a few minutes. And we're going to be asking you same questions at the end to try to figure out how much you've all learned. Some of you may have been lucky enough to sit on the first 2 sessions of this series. Others, this is your first one, so it's totally fine. But it will give us and the presenters an idea of what you already know, and then hopefully at the end of this presentation, you will have learned something. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next poll. So this is our second question here. Okay. So thanks everyone for those responses. I'm going to go to our third question. So again, this is just your best guess at the moment, and it may change when we poll you again at the end of the session. Okay, so our fourth and final poll is up. So this is the last question. All right, just a few more seconds on this last one. Okay, great. All right, so again, welcome. Reminder that everybody can use the chat box to answer questions, and we'll get to those, as we take a break in between each presenter. But I'm going to hand over the controls to our first presenter, Paul Comey, with Green Mountain Coffee Roasters. So, Paul?
Okay. There we go. Show my screen. Let me just clean this up a little.
Sure.
Okay, folks. Well, thank you very much for dialing in and logging onto the screen to participate with us. I'm Paul Comey. I'm with Green Mountain Coffee Roasters. Been with the company for a little over 20 years total. We're a very fast-growing company right now. We finished last year at $1.3 billion. We will finish this year at about $2.3 billion. So we're in the process of experiencing some tremendous growth. And that tremendous growth definitely impacts the company and how we deal with climate change. And I just need to get, there we go. Okay. So what I'm going to go over is our vision and values, our climate change statement, some business activities, how we measured our footprint, what we've done for on-site reductions, and then how we've gone to mitigate our efforts after that. And then proceeding from that, some of the partner relationships we have in the supply chain, and finally, how we try to partner with our consumer. So I think it all starts, for me, with an environmental vision. It's very important that you have the company aligned. And the vision is really what allows your employees to rally around where you're going. And for us, the vision is extremely important. So we're committed to actions consistent with our environmental conscious in all aspects of our business operations. And we have some core values, of which I'm trying to understand why I'm not clicking down here. Just there we go. Okay. You have to excuse me. For some reason, this priority screen is keeping me from advancing my slides. And naturally, in yesterday's test, everything worked fine. And for some reason today, things aren't going along. Rachel, could you jump in and try to explain to me why?
Yeah, I'm trying to figure, is your screen frozen? Have you tried to advance one slide ahead?
Yeah, that's what I'm just trying to advance one, down arrow key to move a slide ahead.
Okay, let me take a look. If you want to just go back to the different screen and manually go ahead, maybe that will work. So what?
It's interesting because when I'm not in full view mode, I can advance.
Hold on, my colleague Andy's here.
Hi, Paul. I wonder if you hadn't tried this already. When you're in slide view, if you had tried clicking on the arrow in the bottom left corner of the screen. If you mouse down there, you'll see a right arrow pop up there.
Yep. Okay.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
So there it is.
Don't usually use those, but that seems to be working. So here we go. Okay, so we want to encourage a spirit of continuous environmental innovation in our products, practices, and programs, and I think we'll be able to demonstrate that to you folks of where we've done that. And lastly, we want to foster and promote programs that increase levels of employee environmental awareness and participation. And that's part of our whole Changing Climate Change program that we've done for the employees and some of the programs that we've brought to them to allow them to have impact in their home and in the work. Consistent with our core values, and I'm not going to read through these, I'm going to leave you folks to move through these at your own, but as you can see, basically we want to make sure that we comply with all state and federal regulations first, but then once we go beyond compliance, we want to go well beyond compliance, and I think that's where measuring your carbon footprint really takes its place. For a company to really move forward, the most important thing is to have the board of directors with you. So a couple of years ago, we went to the board of directors, and we took a Boston-based firm series, and they came up and did a presentation to the board. And because of that 2-hour presentation, we were lucky enough to have the board of directors adopt a climate change statement. And to me, this was really key in moving forward because it took what the CEO and I had done originally and really made it the foundation of the company with everybody from the board on board. And when you look at this, we're really talking about using best practices to measure our greenhouse gas footprint. We're talking about reducing our share of GHG emissions through programs. We're talking about mitigating 100% of our measured emissions that we can't avoid. And this is a very expensive program and something we've been doing since 2003. We're talking about raising the awareness about the reality of climate change and really trying to build will amongst our customers, employees, suppliers. It's really a message we're trying to take and spread very broadly and get other people to participate with us. And then lastly, of course, we want to pursue all measures related to reduction and mitigation of our footprint in a transparent manner and report on it on an annual basis to how our progress is doing. So our primary activities. We're a coffee company, so we source. That means we put a lot of people around the world buying coffee. And we roast. That means we've got a lot of transportation from the equator, which is where most of the coffee is grown, within the 2 tropics. Transported to Vermont and other associated plants, roast it, process it, add flavoring where necessary, grind it, package it in a variety of different packages, of which you'll see one of our most challenges is our single-serve package, and then distribute it back around the country. Bottom line, we're in a very energy and carbon-intensive process. Whether it's gasoline we're using, propane, air travel, freight ton mile, it's a very energy-intensive process. Our approach to measuring our carbon footprint really came as a result in 2002 of working with the state of Vermont when they came to us and they said, you know, you should start an EMS program, Environmental Management System. Out of that system, we actually ended up measuring our carbon footprint. And when we measured our carbon footprint, we were kind of sitting there, myself and the CEO, looking at it, and he said, what are you going to do about it? And I was like, well, I don't know. You know, it's a carbon footprint. We're kind of stuck with it. We can try to reduce it, but it's still there. And he said, well, what do you think about mitigating it? What can we do to try to mitigate our footprint? So we partnered up with a company called Native Energy, and we bought renewable energy credits and offsets in an effort to start to mitigate our footprint. Now, that first year, we just mitigated 30% of our footprint, which was a result of our roasting. And then the next year after that, we mitigated 100% of our footprint. And as you look at the footprint, of course, it depends on what you're going to measure. So we will get into that in a bit. As we did our measuring, of course, we had heating fuel, very easy because it's billed to us on a monthly basis. We had liquid propane, which is primarily the way we fire our roasters. We had our electrical use, transportation for the fleet, business travel, freight inbound and outbound, employee commuting, and brewer transport. And as you can see from this little list, that as you trickle down the list, it gets harder and harder to measure and more expensive to mitigate as you go through it. When we first started, we just measured our Scope 1 and Scope 2 and a tiny piece of Scope 3. So Scope 1, like I say, was easy. You could get the bills in. You could work on an Excel spreadsheet and figure out what your footprint was. Scope 2 is even easier, provided to us by our electric company. Interestingly enough, we're in Vermont and have one of the lowest carbon footprints of any electrical supplier there is. We're about 1/3 hydro, 1/3 nuke, and 1/3 natural gas. So we actually had a very low footprint from an electrical energy point of view compared to a typical grid. And then Scope 3, when we first started out, we just looked at our employee commuting. And then as the years went on, we expanded it to air travel. Then we took outbound freight, and then we started to take some inbound freight. What this tended to do to our footprint was it made it change disproportionately year over year. The thing about changing the boundaries is as you increase the boundaries, the result is that your carbon footprint increases disproportionately with your sales. And we did choose to normalize our footprint on a dollar basis. We've been growing so fast over the past decade that an absolute number just didn't make any sense to us. So we had to normalize it. We took gross dollar sales, and we took therms as a good measure to compare against it. So as we look at that, we looked at our enterprise CO2 by business area. And as we looked at that, we had the specialty coffee business unit, and we had our Keurig business unit. So you can see the Keurig business unit back in 2009 was about 23% of our footprint. And our total footprint back then was 37,000 tons. Compared to today, our footprint will be closer to 95,000 tons. So given our phenomenal growth rate, a phenomenal increase in our footprint. So when we looked at the specialty coffee business unit by component, you can see that outbound freight was a tremendous amount of our footprint, as was employee commuting. Surprisingly enough, propane use, which is how we basically roast our coffee, was only 13%. And of course, electricity purchased, because of our small footprint and the large amount of propane we used, was extremely small. When we looked at Keurig, okay, their indirect was 87%. And the primary reason for that is our business unit at Keurig doesn't manufacture any of their own machines. So everything is manufactured overseas. We did not include the manufacture of our brewers in the Scope 3 indirect emissions. What we did see was a tremendous amount of travel and shipping for Keurig, and that's why that percentage is so great. We look at the CO2 component. Once again, you've got the outbound freight, which comprises the greatest percentage of it, and then you see Keurig air travel next on the heels behind that. So between it, when you really think about it, whether you're moving materials or you're moving people, that's where our greatest impact is. One of the things we do discuss around Scope 3 is if it would make sense to actually look at the manufacture of those hard goods in China and include that in our Scope 3. To this date, we haven't done that, but we are considering it. We've done a lot around on-site reductions, okay? And I'm going to go through a bunch of the programs we've done since 2003 as we started to measure what we did. This is a little graph that shows us a variety of different programs that were put in place and what the resulting reduction in carbon was. So when you look at this, it looks pretty impressive, okay? You've got 665 tons a year that were reduced, but that was on a profile of 37,000 tons that we consumed. So for all of our efforts, a very small percentage reduction, which is why we look at mitigation as an absolute necessity to try to walk the talk around carbon reduction. Now, excuse me, from a mitigation effort point of view, we could say that we've mitigated 91,000 tons in a 5-year period. The most interesting thing is because of our phenomenal growth rate, this year alone, we will produce 90,000 tons of CO2. So it's a very, very fine line to say you want to be proactive on carbon reduction when you're in a phenomenal growth rate. And it really puts the company at odds, in a sense, with kind of our moral compass sometimes. So there's the 91 tons over 5 years that we've mitigated, and then this year we'll do 90 tons alone. For development opportunities, from a measurement point of view, carbon reduction policy has been, absolutely a main focus since 2003. Drawing those meaningful boundaries, like I say, has always been a challenge. You increase the scope, and it appears that your efforts have been reduced, when in fact your efforts are actually increased because you're measuring on a greater scale. So that's why we started to try to engage suppliers about mitigating our footprint. And we also look at coffee communities. Most of the projects in coffee communities deal with planting trees, and we have been more inclined to move towards electrical generation and increasing what's available on the grid. So now I want to go into some of the partners with our supply chain that we've done. One of the people we partnered with was around making our single-serve K-Cup. You can see how they used to go in the existing box. And we looked at that, and we looked at the cube of the freight. And we said, okay, what can we make to do to change this? So we came up with a new box, and we put them in the box in a neatly stacked environment. And by putting them in the box in this environment, we saw some significant reduction. Okay, and when you look at this chart, I want to point out we've got a 20% reduction in volume, or we can get 20% more volume in the tractor-trailer, significantly reducing the carbon footprint of shipping. Another caveat of this was we actually managed to increase the shelf facings for our 12-count box. So here's a true win where we bring the carbon footprint down a bit because of what we're shipping, and we actually get more facings on the shelf. So from a slotting fee point of view, the marketing department wins, the operations folks win, and also environmentally we take a win. So I really do believe when you talk about carbon mitigation and footprint reduction, there can be a win-win-win situation. Here's another example, and this kind of went the wrong way. We contacted our nitrogen company. We use a lot of nitrogen in our package because you want to keep the coffee fresh. And the coffee has three enemies. They're air, moisture, and sunlight. So the nitrogen keeps out the oxygen. And we used to buy liquid. So liquid was produced off-site. It was scope 3. We never measured it. Teamed up, partnered with the company, and put on-site generation in place. So on-site generation uses a lot of electricity to run the air compressors. So our carbon footprint theoretically goes up because of the scope 2 increase. But in reality, our carbon footprint goes down because we're no longer producing off-site, making a liquid, and trucking it to our facility. But unfortunately, because we're not measuring the carbon footprint of that off-site manufacture beforehand, and we do measure the carbon footprint of scope 2, it drives our footprint in the wrong direction and makes it appear that we're really not conscientious about trying to have a reduction in our carbon footprint. On the same sense, here's a great example about reuse, and this is packaging material that we used to purchase, have trucked in, and put in our boxes, and then we started to take our old boxes, shred them on site, basically manufacturing our own material on site, and reducing all of that purchase of new materials and all the freight associated with packaging of our products as we ship it out the door. We also found a company that would buy our boxes that came inbound from suppliers and would pay us about 10 cents a box. So instead of having to just have these recycled, we sold the boxes on the right as boxes to be reused, and allowed another company to reduce their carbon footprint by buying reused boxes instead of having to buy brand new boxes. Same scenario here that you saw on the cardboard you see around our pallets. We used to buy brand new pallets. We found a source that would sell us used pallets that have been reconditioned, and at the same time take any pallets that we had that were in poor condition, recondition them for us, and then sell them back to us. So if you look at the carbon it takes to produce a pallet versus to repair a pallet, you can get a significant decrease in your carbon footprint. Once again, because we weren't measuring the footprint of these pallets previously, to bring a program like this in-house didn't appear to reduce our carbon footprint, but in actuality, it did. Another great example of this is we used to have probably 40 or 50 inkjet printers in the manufacturing site to put date codes and things on our boxes. What we did was we introduced laser printers, which basically remove a layer of coating on the box to date stamp the box. By doing this, we got all of the ink out of our factory, we got all of the hazardous chemicals out of the factory, and we really put in a very repeatable, easy-to-use marking system that doesn't use any chemicals, and the amount of carbon it uses compared to the inkjets is significantly less. So once again, on the manufacturing floor, saving money, reducing the carbon footprint. We looked at the consumer and said to the consumer, what could we do that would leverage at the consumer level a reduction in carbon? And to that, our answer was our single-serve tea product, which is a hot tea. What would happen if we took that and started to make the tea, iced tea, brewed right in the house? Take the ready-to-drink teas, eliminate the refrigeration, eliminate the trucking of all that glass, eliminate the trucking of all that bottled tea, and basically ship that small single-serve K-cup that you see on the bottom right of the screen right to the customer. Have them brew that in their house over a glass of ice. So yes, you still have the environmental carbon footprint of producing a glass of ice, but you're no longer shipping water around the world. You're only shipping the tea, and you're making the ice at the last minute. Could this actually be the ultimate reduction in carbon footprint going all the way from the supply chain to the consumer? We're sure hoping it is. On that same vein, a few years ago, we approached our cup manufacturer, and we used to use a petroleum-based cold cup in all of our vending operations. We partnered up with NatureWorks and came out with a polylactic acid, a PLA-based green cup made of totally non-petroleum products. We then went to International Paper and said to them, we took our petroleum-based cold cup, and now we're looking at our hot cup, and that has a petroleum liner on the inside. We would like to eliminate that petroleum liner on the inside of the cup. And by eliminating that petroleum liner, we would have a cup that was biodegradable in a municipal compost site, made from all renewable resources, and have a lower carbon footprint. That was very well received by the consumer, and that cup became a billboard for communication about projects that we had done about mitigating our footprint with people like Native Energy, where in the last year we just purchased 51% of all the renewable energy credits from the Greensburg, Kansas wind farm, which was a result of a tremendous tornado about 4 years ago, which devastated the town, very similar to what you've seen on the news in some of the other towns this year out in the Midwest. So it was a great program. It put something tangible in the consumer's hand that they could see, and gave us great credibility with the consumer. At that point, the consumer came back to us and said, well, the lid on the cup is still made from a petroleum-based product. What are you doing about that? We went back to International Paper, told them the lid was a priority for us to come to conclusion with a biopolymer. That took 2.5 years to develop that lid. But now we have a lid with a package and a cup that's 100% made from renewable resources. It is compostable in municipal compost sites, except there are so few in the country we really can't advertise that part of it because we're concerned about the FTC guidelines. But it really aligns itself with where the company is as far as partnering with suppliers and trying to move forward in mitigating our carbon footprint. And when we speak about branded partnerships, years ago we started a partnership with Nell Newman of Newman's Own Organics. And Nell came to us because she liked our organic coffee. Brought us on board. We became the first company to co-brand Newman's, and I believe to this date the only co-branded company with Newman's. So when she looked at our packaging, she was like, how come you can't do something better about the packaging like you did about the cup? And we went to our film supplier and said, you know, we're using PLA in our cups. We'd love to use a layer of PLA in our foil package and eliminate some of the petroleum in that package. That took them about 2 years, and they came back to us finally and said, okay, it's a 4-layer package. We're ready to remove 1 layer of petroleum and substitute it with 1 layer of PLA. We believe in baby steps. So we said to the supplier, that's great with us. We'll take a baby step. We'd rather be 1/4 of the way there than not there at all. And it was really a pleasure to be able to call up Nell Newman and say, Nell, We're not where we want to be on the package, but we just moved about 25% closer to where we want to be when it comes to the package. And those are the kind of things where it just reassures your partner that they partnered with the correct people to begin with, and we're staying consistent with our values. We took biodiesel a couple of years ago and converted our fleet from regular diesel to biodiesel. We put a 10,000-gallon tank on site. We converted all the trucks, and at the same time we instigated an anti-idling program where there's no idling allowed on our company grounds, and we don't allow our truck drivers to idle at any of their stops. This resulted in a 15% reduction in fuel consumption, coupled with the fact that we changed to bio, which was B20, so you had a 20% reduction off the existing consumption there as well. Once again, all steps in mitigating your footprint. Or actually, all steps in reducing your footprint. Mitigation still ends up being our ultimate tool to get us to ground zero. We also install a 100,000 kW array on our distribution building. This provides, on a good sunny day, about 42% of the power the building can use. And this was a partnership that we did with the state of Vermont and our utility, Green Mountain Power. All three of us contributing funds. Vermont is a pretty cloudy state. We had a lot of naysayers, but the return on investment of this had a positive cash flow of 2.5 years for the company. So you could do a demonstration project, you could have positive cash flow, you could reduce your carbon footprint. Once again, most of the programs we try to do try to be win-win-win programs. I think that's where you get the most bite for your buck, and it also shows people that carbon reduction can have good economic savings as well, and I think that's really, really key. You can't be out there trying to preach about reducing carbon if you can't show folks that there's going to be some sort of financial reward at the end as well. And then lastly, you know, it's communicating to the consumer what we're doing. Letting our consumer know what we're doing, letting the consumer understand that we have a program, we are trying to reduce our carbon footprint, we're growing tremendously. It's a very tough thing to do, but by carefully measuring it and taking thoughtful steps to reduce it, and then ultimately mitigating it, and mitigating it with programs for us that put more power on the grid. We want to see more green power on the grid. So whether it's biodigesters, whether it's wind farms, we try to take and use everything we do to mitigate our program to get more power on the grid and get us to a lower carbon footprint both today and in the future. And that wraps it up. I think we're probably out of time for me, so thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul. I don't see any questions from anybody, so I can move on. Actually, no, I guess I don't. So if you have any questions for Paul, you can enter them in the question box. Otherwise, I'm going to go ahead and move on to our next presenter, which is Carissa Regano with Pure Strategies Incorporated. All right, Carissa.
All right, thank you. And I have to just say to you personally, I totally appreciate you pronouncing my name right, because it's the exception rather than the rule here. So thank you. I thank you.
All right, no worries.
Okay, so here we go. Can you see? Can you see my screen?
No, not yet.
Yeah. Okay, because all I see is my presentation. Are you sure I have control here?
Yep.
Okay, let's try again.
The presenter, did you get that little pop-up box?
No.
To accept?
No one can see your screen. Hold on. How about now?
Yep, I see it.
You see it now? Okay, I think I clicked the thing. Hang on. Bear with me. Okay, there we go. Hello, everyone. My name is Carissa Regano, and I work at Pure Strategies. We are a sustainability consulting firm here in Massachusetts, and just on a little side note, we are very grateful that we made it through the very scary weather we had last night. I don't know where people are from that are in the audience, but we had a touchdown of a number of tornadoes, which for us in the snow-ravaged Northeast is very unfamiliar. So I'm very happy to be here today, because we were a little bit worried last night. So I am going to talk to everyone about work that we have done for Oakhurst Dairy. First, I want to just tell everyone a little bit about what I'm going to talk about. We're going to talk about calculating and translating carbon footprints, and we've been doing it with Oakhurst Dairy and other clients for over a decade. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the specifics of Oakhurst Dairy, what we found when we initially calculated their carbon footprint, and how we're moving forward in setting and meeting goals in conjunction with reducing their carbon footprint. I will talk a little bit about how the carbon footprinting is done and what they're planning for next as they move forward towards meeting the goals that they've set for themselves. A little bit about Pure Strategies. We are a medium-sized consulting firm here in the northeast part of Massachusetts. Our headquarters are in Gloucester. We have a number of scientists and engineers that work with us, and have many years of experience studying life cycle analysis, sustainability for companies from cradle to grave, and optimizing their production and working with manufacturers' supply chain to move products from manufacturer through the end of life and making that whole process greener. We also have quite a bit of work in CSR reporting, and for instance, for 7th Generation, one of our big clients, we've won the series award for a number of years for best CSR report. Here is a little idea of some of our clients, including the North Face out of the Pacific Northwest, 7th Generation out of Burlington, Vermont, Stonyfield Farms in New Hampshire, and one of our most recent clients that we're actively working with now is Radio Flyer out of Chicago. So let me tell you a little bit about Oakhurst and the work we have done with them. Oakhurst has been around since the early 20s, and it's a family-owned business run by the Bennett family. And in Maine, they have a motto that's the natural goodness of Maine. And they are known in Maine for the quality of their product and the integrity and freshness of their product. I don't know if many of you are from Maine, but being from Maine, there is a very strong bond to things that are made and come from Maine. So that is one of the big parts of Oakhurst's legacy and reputation. They get most of their milk from Maine, from cows in Maine and northern New England. They make other things besides milk, other dairy products that I show right here, everything from sour cream to cottage cheese to yogurt. How do we start working with them? Well, in the summer of 2007, Pure Strategies was approached by Walmart and asked, Walmart being one of their biggest customers, and asked to calculate the carbon footprint associated with 1 gallon of milk. And that's how Pure Strategies started working with Oakhurst. Since then, we have calculated their company-wide carbon footprint since 2007 and reported it out to many organizations that I will talk about a little bit further in my talk. How do we do it? And I'm going to run through these pretty quick because I'm sure as I heard about the other seminars that have been done, everyone's probably heard a ton about how you do a carbon footprint. So the first thing that we did was identify the boundaries around the footprint, the sources of carbon, then we collect data and we prepare the footprint, and then we assess what needs to be done as far as setting goals for cost reduction and carbon reduction, and then we report out to reporting agencies. So here's a little graphic of boundaries that we looked at for Oakhurst Dairy. So we looked at, obviously, electricity was a Scope 2, and then there was a variety of Scope 1 emissions from their warehouses, their distribution centers, their offices there in Portland, refrigerants used to keep the milk and dairy products cold, and we do look at a small amount of Scope 3 emissions, including business travel and employee commuting. So again, the emissions that are found at Oakhurst for Scope 1 and 2 are everything from electricity to all their fuels and their diesel burned by their vehicles. And how did we manage all the data that we get from them? We have done most of their work with spreadsheets and databases, and are currently considering moving on to a software package, although that costs money and it's not clear whether the client's ready to move that way yet. What standards do we look towards when preparing our carbon footprints? They're the World Resources Institute, WRI standards, and the WBCSD, World Business Council for Sustainable Development standards. These are pretty much the gold standards for carbon footprinting and where we look whenever we have a question about what needs to be covered. So here are a whole lot of numbers that I'm going to explain further. Obviously, they don't mean very much right now, but I wanted to show you where most of Oakhurst's emissions come from. And if you take a look, the majority of their emissions are from their fuels, the dark blue bar in the bottom, and then a smaller portion, like a third of that, is electricity emissions. And so once we had, for a number of years, calculated their carbon footprint, we knew it was time to set goals. And I think this is more on the order of what we're going to talk about today. So Oakhurst has set a number of sustainability goals in relation to their carbon footprint, and they are goals that we set in 2010, and they are to be accomplished by 2014. We used a 2008 baseline, and all of these goals are based on a quart equivalent of milk produced. So in other words, all the numbers are normalized by production. So if their production goes way up, the numbers aren't going to be affected. They're going to try to reduce, or they're working to reduce, water, plant energy, greenhouse gas emissions, and transportation emissions by 20%, and solid waste emissions by 5%. How are they trying to do that? Initially, Oakhurst looked to the low-hanging fruit, we like to call it. They did easy things such as worker training. They went through their facility and made sure that employees knew that they were serious at Oakhurst about reducing their carbon and their fuel use. It was simple things like turning off equipment when it wasn't in use. If they're not going to be running their systems on the weekends, they were shutting things down, turning off computers, turning off lights, making sure everything was shut down for the weekend. They installed solar hot water on their main facility in Portland, and they started looking at their transportation since, as we all know, it's a major sucker of diesel fuel. So they looked to convert to biofuel and have bought some hybrid delivery trucks, and then they put on truck skirts and went through an entire rerouting system for their entire delivery system. And these were just the initial things that they did. once they set their goals. And it's amazing how much even the worker training portion can reduce their carbon. So how have they done? By the end of 2010, they had reduced plant energy by 6%, and which is really amazing, doing just the initial things that I listed on the last slide. Almost $60,000 was saved by that. And how did they do that? They upgraded a lot of their lighting. They replaced air compressors in their plant. They installed a new refrigeration system, and they upgraded the solar hot water system that I was discussing, so that as a result they were able to reduce their fuel oil use quite significantly. In 2010, they also reduced their water use by 9%, and this again was a lot of employee awareness that was able to drive this. When they were washing their systems after pasteurizing their milk, they had a lot more awareness on doing full washes, optimizing the amount of sanitizers that they needed to use. They worked with their supplier that supplied the sanitation equipment or solution, and they were sure to keep the floors dry and, turned off conveyors and lights in the facility. So this dashboard, we like to call it, was the results of their efforts as of January 1st, 2011. So if you look at the column that says actual change year to date, that shows you their reduction as of the end of 2011. And you can see there it shows the plant energy was reduced 6%, greenhouse gas emissions were reduced 10% almost, water a little more than 9%. They had a little issue with solid waste that we're right now working on, and their transportation reduced 9%. So in other words, they are well on their way to being halfway to their 2014 goals as of the end of, or the beginning of 2011. So, and I just want to say a few things about that. That is tremendous progress that they've made, but no one at Oakhurst or at Pure Strategies is fooled into thinking the next half is going to be equally as smooth. So we're working on many new efforts that I will discuss by the end of the talk. So what was something else that we were asked to talk about in this conversation? It was, so now Oakhurst knows their carbon footprint. What do they do with the numbers? And one of the things that Oakhurst really believes is necessary is being transparent and communicating what you found to the, communicating it to the public. So they report to the Carbon Disclosure Project, and it's a huge independent not-for-profit organization, and I don't even know the number, but they have more Fortune 500 and small manufacturing companies reporting their carbon emissions to the Carbon Disclosure Project than any other one organization in the world. Oakhurst also has reported to the Innovation Center for U.S. Dairy, which is a big clearinghouse for the U.S. dairy, and they've set an internal commitment to try to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions as an organization by 25% by 2020. So Oakhurst reports their numbers there as part of to reach this huge goal. Oakhurst was also one of the first companies in Maine to sign on to the Governor's Carbon Challenge, and this challenge is, again, voluntary, but it shows Oakhurst's commitment to the environment and to their having their business in Maine and reducing their impact on the environment. The other, besides reporting externally, Oakhurst has demands from their customers being smaller, their schools in New England, Walmart being their largest customer, and then they have other customers, 7-Eleven stores in New England. And Walmart being their biggest customer also has huge demands as far as sustainability and environmental requirements for their clients. Who else does Oakhurst communicate to? They communicate externally to their consumers, mainly on their website and on their packaging labels, whether it be about the biodiesel that they use or the solar energy that they create. This is a picture of the PV panels that are on the top of Oakhurst's Portland facility. And then they also do direct communications to their customers being the people that buy the product off the shelf, because Oakhurst labels some of their products with their initiatives. So as I spoke about before, how is Oakhurst going to reach that second half of their goal? One thing that they're working on that is educating their working staff about better environmental work at home, tips on lowering their personal carbon footprint, on turning off water, because Oakhurst believes that people bring it home, they will also repeat it in the workplace. So they believe that, you know, a cleaner world, it'll be better for everyone. Oakhurst is also looking into investing in wind power out there, maybe not in Portland where it might not be sited safely, but they have many depots where they ship their milk from in outlying areas in Maine. They're completing solar installations, PV installations at some of these depot sites that we were talking about. And they're also looking at converting from oil for heat at their Portland facility to natural gas, as natural gas has just been piped out to them in Portland. And they're hoping that some of these activities will help further lower their carbon footprint. And so then in summary, Oakhurst is a family-owned business that is very dedicated to working in New England. They have tracked their greenhouse gas emissions for years. They've disclosed them widely to both CDP, the state of Maine, and other organizations. They've set very courageous and limitless, I think, reduction goals for each of the parts of their carbon reduction. And they've realized how important their carbon footprint and their reduction efforts are, not just to their customers, but also to their consumers. I want to thank you very much for your time, and if you have any additional questions, I can be reached at the following email address, and feel free to look at our website if you have other questions. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Carissa. I actually did have some questions line up in the queue for you, Great. And I had a few for Paul too. So I'll ask these questions to Carissa first, and if we could take a few minutes.
Mm-hmm.
The first is when talking about boundaries and greenhouse gas generation at the farm, feeding cows, fertilizer, were not part of your analysis for Oakhurst. Is that correct?
That is correct. Not for, when we did the initial analysis for the 1 gallon of milk that I referred to, that Walmart required for their suppliers, we did do that. But as far as for Oakhurst's individual carbon footprint, no, they have not been included.
Okay. The next question is, how is worker training calculated and sustained over the long term?
Okay, I just wanted to say one more thing about the whole cow fertilizer thing. It was, whoever is curious about it, rightfully so to be curious about it, because when we did the analysis for a gallon of milk, that portion was over 40% of the emissions. So that's a very great question, and it should be looked at. Although I don't really know what you do about cows producing methane, because that's kind of like par for the course. So there are less methane-producing feeds available, but, you know, everyone, you know, cows are going to have lots of methane associated with them. Can you just repeat that other question again? I'm sorry.
It was about how worker training is calculated and sustained.
Yeah, I think for Oakhurst, it was just a whole raising the bar as far as what their workers thought about when they went to work. You know, now the whole carbon reduction is more part of their culture there at Oakhurst Dairy. You know, if you went in there 10 years ago, they didn't think about turning off lights or saving water or any of that. But now they know that it's very, very valued by the Bennett family. They have set incentives for their employees to reach these goals. You know, maybe you'll get an extra check in your paycheck every once in a while. So I think this repeated reminder, they have a slideshow that we put together for them showing in their break room that shows this is the accomplishments that they've had, that dashboard that I showed, showing them how great they're doing on reaching their goals. And by continuous reinforcement like that, the workers are really on board. You know, that's how it gets worked. And as far as measuring it, when we saw the reduction in fuel oil use or in water use, because it's directly reflected in the bills, it's obvious that they're catching on.
Okay. So the next question is, I don't know if you're aware, but is Oakhurst looking at generating its own renewable energy with anaerobic digesters?
That's a great question. They do not have cows. Their milk is bought on contract. The farmers are their contractors. So they have worked with their farmers about having anaerobic digesters. The problem right now is that the margin is so small for these farmers that they can't do it.
Okay.
I know when you're making, I mean, I don't even know the exact numbers, but you know how much the government subsidizes milk. And these farmers are working 24/7 and making like 3 cents a gallon. I made up that number, but it's something tiny like that.
Right.
So we have looked into it, and hopefully if things change, you know, that will change. But it's a great suggestion.
Okay, thanks. The next question is actually for Paul. So, Paul, I'm going to unmute you so that you can answer your question. They want to know if Green Mountain Coffee Roasters have tried to quantify the downstream impacts of the Keurig cups. So scope 3. Yeah.
Well, we have looked at the K-Cup, and actually some of the greatest impact from the K-Cup comes more on the manufacturing than the downstream side of it. And we are working on some programs to allow our consumer to mitigate that. Right now they're in trial period, and we're going to be rolling a couple out come this summer for mitigation. We're also looking at some recycle and reuse programs, which would allow us to compost the coffee and use the majority of the K-Cup for our waste energy stream. But they're all prototype programs.
Okay. And then the next question for you, Paul, is if you've had any interaction with Starbucks around the development of the PLA-lined hot cup.
Well, we worked with an international paper. Starbucks chose to go a different route than a biopolymer for a lining, where they chose to go with a recycled content. And they pursued that. We had a discussion with them. We both sit in some environmental groups and discuss and share information. It's just the two companies chose two different paths around their hot cup.
Okay. Great. All right, so that's all I have at the moment. So I am going to move ahead to our next presenter, which is Angela Cora with the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory. So Angela, I will be turning this over to you.
All right. Look good to go? Everybody see okay?
Yeah, I can see your screen.
All right, perfect. Yes, I'm Angela Cora. I'm a research engineer at Pacific Northwest National Laboratory out in Washington State, in southeastern Washington State. Again, I just want to thank everyone for being a part of this webinar today and having me here. I work in sustainable design and development at PNNL, specifically focused on buildings, energy efficiency, and some other activities. And I've been supporting PNNL's greenhouse gas inventory process since 2008, when we first started looking at this as part of an internal initiative. So to give you a little background about PNNL, we have about 4,700 staff members, and we've done about $1.1 billion in business volume in 2010. Kind of like Green Mountain Coffee Roasters, we're growing tremendously since 2007 when we first started looking at our inventory. Our number of employees have increased by more than 20%, and our business volume has increased by over 40%, which has some interesting implications for us. But as I said, we're a national laboratory, one of 13 national laboratories. We're operated by Battelle for the Department of Energy. And we have our main campus in Richland, which is southeastern Washington, and we have some satellite campuses in Seattle, Sequim, and Portland, Oregon, and also DC. And then we also have employees dispersed around the country in their own home offices, a few here and there. We do a lot of, our primary work is in energy, national security, and environmental research. So a little bit about PNNL sustainability program. Part of our, we follow a framework that takes the triple bottom line approach of the environmental stewardship, economic prosperity, and social responsibility, the people, planet, profit framework that we're all pretty familiar with. And within that framework, we have 12 core areas, 12 core priorities. And reducing greenhouse gas emissions is one of our core areas within environmental stewardship. We have a lot of compliance requirements as a federal entity. We're contracted through the Department of Energy. And so we have a pretty long history of environmental management program, over 15 years of a formal program in place. And so we're able to take all of that and transform it into the sustainability framework and measure different aspects of it. But in terms of reducing our greenhouse gas emissions, again, we started in 2008, looking at our 2007 data, and developed our inventory based on a lot of the existing protocols at the time. So Krista mentioned the World Resources Institute Greenhouse Gas Protocol. We looked at the EPA Climate Leaders methodologies and Climate Registry and a few others, and developed our own inventory based on the general process that you all are probably pretty familiar with. And so, we started out by looking at our boundaries and deciding what to include and what not to include. Then, of course, you calculate your emissions, you set some targets, prioritize your emission reduction activities, including offsets, and then, of course, report year to year and assess your progress toward your goals. When we started out in 2008 doing an inventory, we did develop this methodology based on existing resources, and in 2010, the federal government actually developed a formal methodology for federal agencies to use as part of an executive order that was signed in October 2010, or I'm sorry, in 2009. And as a result, there's been a formal methodology that was finalized last year, and we've adapted our inventory to fit within that framework. But the federal government really is showing leadership in establishing this executive order, which requires federal agencies to track measure, track, and reduce their greenhouse gas emissions, along with many other sustainability metrics such as water reduction goals and waste reduction goals that already existed in other legislation, but the latest executive order really just turned that in, took greenhouse gas emissions and used it as a normalizing metric for a lot of those other activities. So to give you a little bit of background about our campus, our main campus in Richland, we have about 80 facilities, different buildings, and it covers a wide variety of building types, vintages, sizes. We have a lot of laboratories on campus where we do a lot of nuclear research. We've got a lot of data centers, some warehouses, and of course a lot of office space. The ownership of the facilities has some interesting implications for how we do our inventory and what we include and what we don't include, depending on the audience, whether it's DOE or our entire campus. So just touching on our operational boundaries, so what we included, our scope, we can see our scope 1 emissions are stationary combustion, mobile combustion, so our fleet vehicles, and fugitive emissions. We do have some fugitive emissions from laboratory processes. We have some sulfur hexafluoride gas use, which has a pretty high global warming potential, so we've captured that. Purchased electricity as our scope 2 emissions, and scope 3, we've included business travel, employee commuting, waste transportation and disposal, wastewater treatment, and transmission and distribution losses from purchased electricity. Again, these what we included in our boundaries is kind of defined by that methodology, the federal methodology that we're required to follow. So one of our first steps, especially back in 2008 and then also subsequently, is really establishing a team and identifying our data sources. And as I mentioned, we have a pretty robust environmental management system in place. And so it was really a matter of finding the people who had the existing data, who've been tracking our energy consumption and our business travel data and things like that, and modifying as necessary to get it in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. But that's one of the important things we found was really identifying the data holder and documenting that, so that way year after year you know who to go to and who holds that data. When it comes to calculating our emissions, we did develop an internal inventory calculator that we've been using, and this is based on a lot of existing calculators that are out there. We developed our own tool just because we wanted a place to track our emissions year to year in one place, and we could see it in different views and customize it as we really wanted to. And when we developed this in 2009, it was really kind of a priority for us. And then also so we could view our inventory in different ways and slice and dice the data as it made sense depending on the purpose. Touching a little bit on just one part of our electricity scope 2 emissions, and Paul mentioned this in his presentation of the difference in emission factors. And here in Washington State and even in Richland, we're lucky enough to have a predominant amount of hydro as our emission source or our electricity source. Something like 80–85% is hydro, and then 10% nuclear, and then the rest is coal, natural gas, and a few other things. So when we first did our inventory in 2008, we used a local emission factor since we had that data available, and then since then, with the federal reporting requirements, we have moved to using a regional emission factor, since for the federal government and all the federal agencies, they've selected the regional emission factor as the default to use to enable ease of accounting, and then also just consistency across all the multiple sites nationwide. And so you can really see the difference that it makes in using local, state, regional, or even national emission factors, and the transparency and making sure that it's clear, which factors you use, and referring to whatever protocol the organization might use is pretty important. This just gives you a picture of our emissions from 2007 to 2010. You can see scope 2 emissions are definitely our biggest source. Again, this is because, partly because we've been using our regional emission factor. And for us, actually, business travel and employee commuting are the next highest emission sources, partly because of the business development that we do as part of our business, and then also we have a lot of international work overseas for nuclear national security work and a lot of other equipment calibration and things like that. Employee commuting was also high for us. We are in a fairly spread out area out in southeastern Washington and don't have a lot of alternative commuting options available, so that's something else that we're looking at. Overall, our emissions have increased by 16% compared to 2007. Again, a lot of that is due to our business growth. Unfortunately, with the executive order and the federal reporting requirements, while we've done some internal normalization of our data to understand, better understand what's happening, our annual totals are actually tracked on an aggregate GHG basis, and we can't do any normalization when we report back to DOE. So you can see here in this next slide of when we set our reduction targets, the Department of Energy has actually set a 28% reduction goal for Scope 1 and 2 emissions, and a 13% reduction goal for Scope 3 emissions. Again, this is total emissions, no normalization, so it's really a challenge, as a lot of different organizations also have the same growth, and as for us, computational capabilities with our data centers and supercomputers keeps growing, and so what do we do about that? What we actually saw, and you can see in 2010 on our Scope 1 and 2 emissions, from a result of purchasing our renewable energy credits, our RECs, we are actually way below our 28% reduction goal. But again, according to this methodology that we're following, RECs are only allowed to offset your Scope 2 purchased electricity emissions. So we still have all our Scope 1 emissions and our Scope 3 emissions that we're figuring out how to address. So, we have our targets set. We also have adopted the 28% reduction goals and 13% reduction goals from the DOE. And then what we did in 2010, last year, is we had a project where we were funded to look at, a case study of P&L, as we've had all of these different goals and we have the different DOE goals, but what if we really took a hard look and tried to determine what it would take to be a climate neutral campus in 2020. And so climate neutral meaning no net greenhouse gas emissions. And so we followed a process in this research report similar to the inventory process of establishing a baseline, assessing past emission reduction efforts. And so we worked very closely with our facility and operations folks to understand what's been done previously and the results and reductions from that, what are planned future projects and estimated abatement potentials. And where we hadn't looked at specific areas, we researched some options and built upon existing knowledge and expertise of staff to come up with those estimates. We also assessed our renewable energy potential, building off against some existing reports, identified some offset options, and then developed an implementation plan of how we might achieve this. The graph on the right here you can see is just a picture of what it would take to get to climate neutral in 2020 and the different activities that we identified in each one of those. One of the first steps as we were looking at this evaluation of getting to climate neutral, we looked at our buildings and evaluated, where are our biggest energy users, and then also looked at the energy use per square foot, or energy use intensity, or EUI, and looking at those two together to try to identify, where might be our biggest priority areas in terms of building-related reduction opportunities. Then we took our list of strategies that we developed as a result of talking with internal folks and doing research, and evaluated each one of our buildings, especially our largest facilities, in terms of, is this strategy applicable or not, and is it applicable to the entire building, or maybe only a portion of the building, or maybe it's already been done. And we looked at conservation strategies, energy efficiency strategies, and renewable energy strategies. Wrong way. When we looked at our business travel baseline, again, trying to understand what our travel is for, where it's going, and what's the results, we looked at, we see that air travel is the primary component of our business travel emissions, and a lot of that is to international locations. And then we also looked at where are our primary destinations, and maybe there's some options that we could set up, such as video conferencing centers and things like that, to try to reduce travel to certain locations. when it comes to employee commuting alternatives, we did a survey, actually. We've done 2 surveys, one in 2009 and one in 2010, to get the data, not only to feed our inventory, but then also to try to identify some alternatives or what we might be able to do to reduce our emissions from commuting. And you can see here, this just gives you a picture of what our current commute looks like. The majority of staff commute in a single occupancy vehicle. So 75% of staff and 25% use alternatives regularly. The vehicle type for most employees is passenger cars and then also SUVs and trucks. But there is some hybrid use, and then commuting alternatives, again, carpooling, and even biking and walking are some of the biggest options people use right now. So in our commute survey, in our second round, we did ask some questions to try to understand what would people be willing to do. And interestingly enough, we included transit rail, commuter rail, and some of those other options since they are available in our satellite campuses in Seattle and Portland and so forth. But while it's not available in the Tri-Cities or the Richland area right now, where our main campus is, there is some interest. And so, information like this could help feed maybe long-term regional planning efforts in this area. And so when we looked at our entire inventory and realized that business travel and employee commute are such kind of a large part of that, as a laboratory and management at the lab has really identified Scope 3 as being an important area for us. And we have 2 working groups that are looking at employee commute and business travel specifically and evaluating what we currently do and industry best practices and seeing what might be possible given the characteristics of our work. And these are just some examples of what we've brainstormed as potential options to really change the way we currently do things right now. And culture change is a big part of this. I know some other people have talked about that, and that really is a big thing, is once you get that culture change in place, then a lot of really great things can happen, but it can take a little time to get that to happen. So a result of our climate neutral planning efforts, we came up with this graph to show what are our top 10 strategies. And this was specifically, well, as it turned out, a lot of the building strategies are big for us. Building systems recommissioning, ground source heat pumps, etc. And this has really been used as a tool going forward as we're looking at planning at the lab, especially on the building side of things. And it's also validated a lot of our efforts that we've done to date. Building systems recommissioning is something that at the laboratory we've instituted a policy to recommission buildings every 4 years. And the savings potential for that is huge, as you can see. Some of the other higher cost items, such as ground source heat pumps, et cetera, we've been able to identify those as some areas where we might be able to use some different funding mechanisms, such as ESPCs or energy savings performance contracts with our local utility. Whereas some of the lower cost items we could be able to fund more internally. And on a side note, we just had a building, one of our newest facilities that was completed in 2009, has a ground source heat pump installed, and we've seen something like a 30% reduction in energy use compared to what it was predicting, what a typical building like without a ground source heat pump might use, which translates to over $200,000 in utility bill savings. So, again, that shows how a lot of these efforts not only are great for the environment, but also affect your bottom line in terms of economic prosperity. As for reporting our emissions and our progress and our goals, we have adopted the Global Reporting Initiative framework, the GRI framework, and in 2009 we did our first sustainability report. I think we are the only national laboratory that uses the GRI framework to communicate our progress. And then we also developed a site sustainability plan in 2010, and this is a requirement for DOE, but it also tracks our progress against those executive order goals, sustainability goals that I mentioned earlier. And we're also working on some internal efforts in terms of communicating to staff and developing websites, et cetera, to really get the message out there of what we're doing, what we have been doing historically for many years, and just it's kind of been rebranded with the greenhouse gas term. But that just gives you an idea of what we've been doing here at PNNL. And thank you for your time. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to take them now.
Thank you, Angela. We did get one question. Person wanted to know if your lab chemicals management includes a greenhouse gas footprint metric.
So currently we don't have as much of that. We do take all of our chemical management data and evaluate it in terms of, which ones have a global warming potential, and use that to calculate our inventory. And we do have a pretty robust chemical management program in terms of chemical recycling and so forth. But as far as the actual greenhouse gas impact, I don't believe that's communicated to staff right now, if that's kind of what the question is. But it's something we evaluate and do include in our inventory.
I got a question. This is actually, do you have a shared data center with other firms?
I don't believe that we do. We have our own data centers here on campus, and I think we have been playing around a little bit with some of the cloud computing options that are out there, and our IT services are kind of looking into some options and the potential there. But we do operate a lot of data centers here on campus for the majority of our computing needs.
Is PPNL conducting a footprint for all of the national labs, the Department of Energy national labs?
No, so each laboratory is responsible for doing their own greenhouse gas footprint, or actually collecting the data that they then give to DOE, and DOE does some of the internal calculations to produce the DOE inventory that then goes to headquarters, and they evaluate all the federal agencies. So we've provided some support to the development of the guidance documents for different agencies to use, and we also support some of the federal agencies in their first inventory efforts. But each national lab does their own inventory.
Okay, great. We are getting close to time, so I just want to thank all of our presenters. I've unmuted all of our 3 panelists and organizers. I want to remind the participants that you can access the presentations and recording, and I also want to initiate the same polls. So for you participants that are still on the line, if you wouldn't mind trying your luck again at these same questions. And if you don't have time to scribble down the website address of where everything's going to be posted, don't worry. You'll be getting a follow-up email tomorrow, and it will have that website link for you. So, that will be available. And the answers to these polling questions will also be available. We'll let you know the correct answer for each of the 4 questions. Okay. Next one. Do any of our presenters have anything else that they want to add while I'm taking this poll? Okay, well, again, I just want to thank everybody that presented and prepared something for this webinar, and I want to thank the attendees that are on the line and are filling out this poll for me. Just got 2 more minutes, 2 more polls, actually. And, another shout out to Michelle Gaither at PPRC for helping me organize this webinar and secure presenters for this session, as well as the 2 previous that we had. And if you missed either of, if you missed the first 2, the email will have information about where you can get the presentations for these as well. So you can kind of catch up on stuff they have missed. But, I must say that I learned a lot today, so thank you very much. And I actually do have one other question for Angela.
Yep.
I believe. Do you have district heating or cooling on your campus?
We do not. No, we have natural gas boilers, and then we actually, since electricity rates are very affordable in this area, we do have a lot of rooftop units and things like that for our smaller office buildings.
Okay. Great. So, and if anybody, has follow-up questions, I think all of the presenters included their information and my email. You'll see my email address in the follow-up tomorrow, so you can always forward any additional questions on to me, and I can connect with these presenters and try to get them answered for you.
This is Michelle Gaither, and on this final polling question, this will probably give it away, but the second bullet should say purchasing offsets, not upgrades.
Oh. That was my bad because I was furiously typing them in. But okay, I'm going to close these polls and end the webinar. So I hope everybody enjoys the rest of their afternoon. And thank you for joining. Thank you to all our presenters.
And thanks to Rachel for coordinating everything.
Thanks.
Good day.
Bye.